Good evening and welcome to this presentation of C.S. Lewis's The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Last week, I promised to introduce you to a boy named Eustace. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is the third in the Chronicles of Narnia, begins with the introduction of Eustace. He is the cousin of the four children that you've seen in the previous two novels. He's the cousin of Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. And this is how C.S. Lewis introduces Eustace. There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. His parents called him Eustace Clarence, and his schoolmasters called him Scrubb. I can't tell you how his friends spoke to him, for he had none. He didn't call his father and mother, but Harold and Alberta. They were very up-to-date and advanced people. They were vegetarians, non-smokers, and teetotalers, and wore a special kind of underclothes. In their house, there was very little furniture and very few clothes on the beds, and the windows were always opened. Eustace Clarence liked animals, especially beetles, if they were dead and pinned on a card. He liked books, if they were books of information, and had pictures of grain elevators or of fat foreign children doing exercises in model schools. Eustace Clarence disliked his cousins, the four Provences. That's their last name, by the way. Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. But he was quite glad when he heard that Edmund and Lucy were coming to stay. For deep down inside, he liked bossing and bullying. And though he was a puny little person who couldn't have stood up to even Lucy, let alone Edmund, in a fight, he knew that there were dozens of ways to give people a bad time if they are in your own home and they are only visitors. It was the holidays again, and Peter was being tutored for an upcoming exam. Susan was in America with her parents, so Edmund and Lucy have to stay with their uncle and aunt and their brat of a cousin, Eustace, resigning themselves to the vacation from hell. Their own consolation is a picture in Lucy's room of a ship that reminds them of their adventures in Narnia. The picture on the wall is of a ship. Her prow is shaped like the head of a dragon. She has only one mast and one large square sail, colored purple. One day, when Edmund and Lucy were looking at the picture and talking about Narnia, Eustace came into the room and began to tease them about their belief in fairy tales. All of a sudden, the three children are transported into the picture, and they find themselves on board the ship in the picture, feeling the wind blowing in their faces and smelling the salt of the sea. A familiar face approaches them. It's King Caspian, who they met in the previous book. Caspian explains that he's on a voyage to find the 7 friends of his father, who had been exiled by his evil uncle, who had stolen the throne of Narnia. Caspian also introduces the 3 children to the crew. The captain of the ship is Lord Drinian, and Edmund and Lucy are delighted to see an old friend from the last book, Reepicheep, a mouse about 2 feet in stature, tail, mustache, sword, and feisty. Immediately we see that he and Eustace will not get along. Eustace, of course, is extremely upset that he has been magically taken from his home and placed on board a ship, in which he will not have his own bedroom and bathroom. He keeps a journal, and this is his first impression of his situation. August 7th. Have now been 24 hours on this ghastly boat, if it isn't a dream. All the time, a frightful storm has been raging. It's a good thing I'm not seasick. Huge waves keep coming in over the front, and I have seen the boat nearly go under a number of times. All the others pretend to take no notice of this, either from swank or because Harold says one of the most cowardly things ordinary people do is to shut their eyes to facts. It's madness to come out into the sea in a rotten little thing like this, not much bigger than a lifeboat, and of course absolutely primitive indoors. No proper saloon, no radio, no bathrooms, no deck chairs. I was dragged all over it yesterday evening, and it would make anyone sick to hear Caspian show off his funny little toy boat as if it were the Queen Mary. I tried to tell him what real ships are like, but he's too dense. E and L, that's Edmund and Lucy, of course, didn't back me up. I suppose a kid like Lucy doesn't realize the danger, and Edmund is buttering up Caspian, as everyone does here. They call him a king. I said I was a Republican, but he had to ask me what that meant. He doesn't seem to know anything at all. Needless to say, I've been put in the worst cabin of the boat, a perfect dungeon, and Lucy has been given a whole room on deck to herself. Almost a nice room compared with the rest of this place. Caspian says that's because she's a girl. I tried to make him see what Alberta says, that's his mother. All that sort of thing is really lowering girls, but he was too dense. Still, he might see that I shall be ill if I'm kept in that hole any longer. Edmund says we mustn't grumble because Caspian is sharing it with us himself to make room for Lucy. As if that didn't make it more crowded and far worse. Nearly forgot to say that there is also a kind of mouse thing that gives everyone the most frightful cheek. The others can put up with it if they like, but I shall twist his tail pretty soon if he tries it on me. The food is frightful, too. One day, Eustace decides to tease Reepicheep, as he'd promised to do in his journal, by sneaking up from behind, grabbing his tail, and twirling him about. Reepicheep recovers and draws his sword to punish Eustace. "Stop it," spluttered Eustace. "Go away. Put that thing away. It's not safe. Stop it, I say. I'll tell Caspian. I'll have you muzzled and tied up." "Why do you not draw your own sword, poltroon?" cheeped the mouse. "Draw and fight, or I'll beat you black and blue with the flat." "I haven't got a sword," said Eustace. "I'm a pacifist. I don't believe in fighting." "Do I understand," said Reepicheep, withdrawing his sword for a moment and speaking very sternly, "that you do not intend to give me satisfaction?" "I don't know what you mean," said Eustace, nursing his hand. "If you don't know how to take a joke, I shan't bother my head about you." When Eustace realizes that everyone in Narnia takes duels seriously, he apologizes and lets Lucy bandage his wounds. The Dawn Treader arrives to the Lone Islands, weighs anchor, and Caspian, Edmund, Lucy, and Eustace go ashore. They are soon captured by slave traders who tie them up and take them to the capital city to be sold. Along the way, Caspian is sold to a fine-looking, bearded man who turns out to be one of the 7 exiled friends of Caspian's father. He tells Caspian that he arrived on the lone islands years ago, and that the other 6 friends sailed east. He tells Caspian that even though the lone islands are under the rule of Narnia, they are governed by a corrupt ruler who allows slavery. The bearded man, whose name is Bern, helps Caspian travel to the capital city, where they rescue Edmund, Lucy, and Eustace. They then go to the governor's palace, where Caspian fires him and makes Bern the new governor of the lone islands. They then set sail to find the other 6 friends of Caspian's father. During this time, they encounter a terrible storm, and they suffer damage to the ship and lose much of their food and water. So they have to ration everyone's food and drink. One night, Reepicheep catches Eustace stealing some water. This is how Eustace described it in his journal. September 6th, a horrible day. Woke up in the night knowing I was feverish and must have a drink of water. I'm the last person to try to get any unfair advantage, but I never dreamed that this water rationing was meant to apply to a sick man. In fact, I would have woken the others up and asked for some, only I thought it would be selfish to wake them. So I just got up and took my cup and tiptoed out to the black hole we sleep in, taking great care not to disturb Caspian and Edmund, for they'd been sleeping badly since the heat and the short water began. I always try to consider others, whether they are nice to me or not. I got out all right into the big room, if you can call it a room, where the rowing benches and the luggage are. The thing of water is at this end. All was going beautifully, but before I'd drawn a cupful, who should catch me but that little spy Reep? I tried to explain that I was going on deck for a breath of air. The business about the water had nothing to do with him, and he asked me why I had a cup. He made such a noise that the whole ship was roused. They treated me scandalously. I asked, as I think anyone would have, why Reepicheep was sneaking about the water cask in the middle of the night. He said that as he was too small to be of any use on deck, he did sentry over the water every night so that one more man could go to sleep. Now comes their rotten unfairness. They all believed him. Can you beat it? I had to apologize, or the dangerous little brute would have been at me with his sword. And then Caspian showed up in his true colors as a brutal tyrant and said out loud for everyone to hear that anyone found stealing water in future would get 2 dozen. I didn't know what this meant till Edmund explained it to me. It comes in the sort of books that those Provenci kids read. After this cowardly threat, Caspian changed his tune and started being patronizing. Said he was sorry for me and that everyone felt just as feverish as I did and we must all make the best of it, etc., etc. Odious, stuck-up prig. Stayed in bed all day today. Well, then the Dawn Treader comes to an island where they can get food and water and repair the ship, while the crew is on shore preparing a campsite and hunting for food. Eustace gets the brilliant idea to wander off, and of course, he gets himself lost and in a valley where he stumbles upon a cave next to a pond. As he approaches the pond, a dragon comes out of the cave, but it's sickly and it drops dead. Then it starts raining, big time. So Eustace goes into the dragon's cave to stay dry. While there, he falls asleep, but not before he discovers an enormous treasure of gold coins and jewelry. Eustace puts on a pearl bracelet around his arm above the elbows, and because it was too big for his waist. And then he falls asleep. When he awakens, he discovers that he has been magically changed into a dragon himself, and that the bracelet is severely pinching his arm. Eustace, as a dragon, flies over the island and finds the crew, who have been desperately searching for him all day and night. When they realize it's Eustace, they're relieved, but they don't know how they can take him on the ship for the rest of the voyage. Then, the next morning, Edmund is awakened and he sees a boy walking towards him. It's Eustace, looking like a boy again, but he's not the self-centered brat that he once was. And this is the story Edmund tells, or Eustace tells Edmund. Well, anyway, I looked up and saw the very last thing I expected. A huge lion coming slowly towards me. And one queer thing was that there was no moon that night, but there was moonlight where the lion was. So it came nearer and nearer. I was terribly afraid of it. You may think that being a dragon, I could have knocked any lion out easily enough. But it wasn't that kind of fear. I wasn't afraid of it eating me. I was just afraid of it, if you can understand. Well, it came closer up to me and looked straight into my eyes. And I shut my eyes tight. But that wasn't any good because it told me to follow it. You mean it spoke? I don't know. Now that you mention it, I don't think it did. But it told me all the same. And I knew I'd have to do what it told me. So I got up and followed it. And it led me a long way into the mountains. And there was always this moonlight over and round the lion wherever it went. So at last we came to the top of a mountain I'd never seen before. And on the top of this mountain, there was a garden, trees and fruit and everything. In the middle of it, there was a well. I knew it was a well because you could see the water bubbling up from the bottom of it. But it was a lot bigger than most wells, like a very big round bath with marble steps going down into it. The water was as clear as anything, and I thought if I could get in there and bathe it would ease the pain in my leg. But the lion told me I must undress first. Mind you, I don't know if he said any words out loud at all. I was just going to say that I couldn't undress because I hadn't any clothes on, when I suddenly thought that dragons are snaky sort of things, and snakes can cast their skins. Oh, of course, thought I, that's what the lion means. So I started scratching myself, and my scales began coming off all over the place. And then I scratched a little deeper, and instead of just scales coming off here and there, my whole skin started peeling off beautifully, like it does after an illness, or as if I was a banana. In a minute or two, I just stepped out of it all. I could see it lying there beside me, looking rather nasty. It was a most lovely feeling, and so I started to go down into the well for my bath. But just as I was going to put my foot into the water, I looked down and saw that it was all hard and rough and wrinkled and scaly, just as it had been before. Oh, that's all right, said I. It only means I had a smaller suit on underneath the first, and I'll have to get out of it too. So I scratched and tore again. This underskin peeled off beautifully, and I stepped and left it lying beside and the other one, and went down to the well for my bath. Well, exactly the same thing happened again. And I thought to myself, oh dear, however many skins have I got to take off? For I was longing to bathe my leg. So I scratched away for the third time and got off a third skin, just like the two others, and stepped out of it. But as soon as I looked at myself in the water, I knew it had been no good. Then the lion said, but I don't know if it spoke, you will have to let me undress you. I was afraid of his claws, I can tell you, but I was pretty nearly desperate now. So I just lay flat down on my back and let him do it. The very first tear he made was so deep that I thought it had gone right into my heart. And when he began pulling the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I'd ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was just the pleasure of feeling the stuff peel off. You know, if you've ever picked the scab of a sore place, it hurts like Billy O, but it is such fun to see it coming away. I know exactly what you mean, said Edmund. Well, he peeled the beastly stuff right off, just as I thought I'd done it myself the other 3 times, only they hadn't hurt. And there it was lying on the grass, only ever so much thicker and darker and more knobbly looking than the others had been. And there was I, as smooth and soft as a peeled switch, and smaller than I'd been. Then he caught hold of me. I didn't like that much, for I was very tender underneath now that I'd no skin on, and he threw me into the water. It smarted like anything, but only for a moment. After that, it became perfectly delicious as soon as I started swimming and splashing and found that all the pain had gone from my arm. And then I saw why. I'd turned into a boy again. You'd think me simply phony if I told you how I felt about my own arms. I know they've no muscle and are pretty moldy compared with Caspian's, but I was so glad to see them. After a bit, the lion took me out and dressed me. Dressed you with his paws? Well, I don't exactly remember that bit, but he did somehow or other, in new clothes, the same I've got on now, as a matter of fact. And then suddenly I was back here, which is what makes me think it must have been a dream. No, it wasn't a dream, said Edmund. Why not? Well, there are the clothes, for one thing, and you have been, well, undragoned for another. What do you think it was then? Asked Eustace. I think you've seen Aslan, said Edmund. Aslan, said Eustace. I've heard that name mentioned several times since we've joined the Dawn Treader, and I felt, I don't know what. I hated it, but I was hating everything then. And by the way, I'd like to apologize. I'm afraid I've been rather beastly. That's all right, said Edmund. Between ourselves, you haven't been as bad as I was on my first trip to Narnia. You were only an ass, but I was a traitor. Well, don't tell me about it then, said Eustace. But who is Aslan? Do you know him? Well, he knows me, said Edmund. He is the great lion, the son of the emperor over the sea, who saved me and saved Narnia. We've all seen him. Lucy sees him most often. And it may be Aslan's country we are sailing to. Well, before we resume the story, I hope you can see what is C.S. Lewis's way of telling children what repentance and baptism is all about in this story of Eustace being transformed from the dragon that he was to the boy that Aslan wants him to be. After that, the Dawn Treader resumes its adventures. They narrowly escape an attack by a sea serpent. Then they visit a strange island where they find a knight's armor and weapons near a pool of water, but no bones. They look in the pool and see a golden statue of a man lying at the bottom of the pool. And they realize that anything that touches the water turns to gold, and that the knight in the pool must be one of Caspian's father's friends. And now they found two. Then they come to a really strange island. It has a beautiful estate, a manor house, and well-kept lawns, but it's totally deserted. Then they begin hearing voices, and they realize that the people on the island are invisible. When they encounter the invisible people, they are told that a magician who lives in the manor house made them very ugly because they disobeyed him. So they found the magician's book in the house and cast a spell on themselves to be invisible, so they wouldn't have to see how ugly they'd become. So Lucy, with the help of Aslan, who appears to her, is able to undo the spell and make the people who are called duffel pads visible again. They then leave that island, and the Dawn Treader takes them to another island where they stop and find a large table covered with food fit for a king's banquet. Seated at the table are three men with long beards, sound asleep. As you might have guessed, these are three of the friends of Caspian's father. And the banquet table is called Aslan's table. They are told this by a beautiful young woman who apparently lives on the island. Then her father appears. His name is Ramandu, and he tells them he is a retired star. He tells the adventurers that they are on the island at the end of the world. The world of Narnia is flat, not round. And he tells Caspian and the others how to get all the way to the end of the world, where they will find Aslan's country. If they get there, it will undo the enchantment that will awaken the three sleepers at Aslan's table. So they continue sailing through the last sea of the world, and they find the seawater is now not only drinkable, but the sweetest, most energizing drink they've ever tasted. Also, the water becomes filled with lilies, so that everything looks white to the travelers. Then Aslan appears to Caspian and tells him that he and the crew must go back, but Lucy, Edmund, and Eustace should keep going forward in the ship's lifeboat. They sadly say farewell, and Caspian goes back to the island of Aslan's table, and he takes the beautiful young woman to be his wife and queen. Lucy, Edmund, and Eustace sail on in the dinghy until they come to a shore. And here, as the story of the Dawn Treader ends, they see something they never expected. They see a lamb. "Come and have breakfast," said the lamb in its sweet, milky voice. Then they noticed, for the first time, that there was a fire lit on the grass and fish roasting on it. They sat down and ate the fish, hungry now for the first time for many days. And it was the most delicious food that ever tasted. "Please, lamb," said Lucy, "is this the way to Aslan's country?" "Not for you," said the lamb. "For you, the door into Aslan's country is from your own world." "What?" said Edmund. "Is there a way into Aslan's country from our world too?" "There is a way into my country from all the worlds," said the lamb. But as he spoke, his snowy white flushed into tawny gold, and his size changed, and he was Aslan himself, towering above them and scattering light from his mane. "Oh, Aslan," said Lucy, will you tell us how to get into your country from our world?" "I shall be telling you all the time," said Aslan, "but I will not tell you how long or short the way will be, only that it lies across a river, But do not fear that, for I am the great bridge builder. And now come, I will open the door in the sky and send you to your own land." "Please, Aslan," said Lucy, "before we go, will you tell us when we can come back to Narnia again? Please, and do make it soon." "Dearest," said Aslan very gently, "you and your brother will never come back to Narnia." "Oh, Aslan," said Edmund and Lucy, both together in despairing voices. "You are too old, children," said Aslan, "and you must begin to come close to your own world now." "It isn't Narnia, you know," sobbed Lucy. "It's you. We shan't meet you there. And how can we live never meeting you?" "But you shall meet me, dear one," said Aslan. Are you there too, sir?" said Edmund. "I am," said Aslan. "But there I have another name. You must learn to know me by that name. This was the very reason why you were brought to Narnia, that by knowing me here for a little, you may know me better there." "And is Eustace never to come back here either?" said Lucy. "Child," said Aslan, "do you really need to know that? Come, I am opening the door in the sky." I hope you're reminded of the encounter between Jesus as resurrected and Peter in John 21 in this last scene of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And we see also what Lewis intended in these books, and that is by children reading them and hearing these stories that have inklings and glimpses of the gospel. As they get older in this world, they'll come to know Aslan as Jesus. Thanks so much for listening, and next week I hope you'll join us for the Silver Chair.